Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Kev Baker, for the next 2 hours right here on Truth Frequency Radio. And we are going out live from the smart land of Glasgow in the heartland of Scotland. We've got people listening in Australia, up in Alaska, over in Norway, back to Nebraska, and everywhere in between. And we do that thanks to Truth Frequency Radio Network, one of the remaining platforms, and may it long continue, where we can confidently speak freely without worrying about getting kicked off the internet. And yes, some of you may, and probably most of you may not know, that overnight my Facebook experience has come to an end. Yes, and then they came for me. Now, don't even ask me what it was that I posted on there to violate their terms of service, because as you know, I've been very outspoken about what I call anti-social media and their algorithms for about 6 months or so now. So I would imagine I fell victim to maybe people tagging me in their post. Who cares? I'm gone. Scott Lopez is gone. Popeye's gone. But of course, it's all random. You know, it just coincidentally happened to fall on the three of us at the same time. Nothing to worry about there. So I'm going to have Scott Lopez on the show tomorrow. Boy, oh boy, are we going to get into all of that. But before then, I know tonight's show is going to blow your mind. It's going to blow your mind. How can I be so confident in saying that? Because over the years, I have, on occasion, had many's a guest on here to talk about one of our favourite subjects. The Giants, the Nephilim. You know, all the good stuff we've been into in the past. And I honestly thought that I had a good handle on what's going on when it came to the Giants in the Bible. But that was until I met tonight's returning guest, Ken Ammi. And I can assure you that there will be people listening to this broadcast that will be wanting to drag me through their screen. They'll be wanting to throw punches at me and Ken. Why? Because we're going to lay out the truth about the Giants. We're going to separate the very few facts from the abundant fiction that is out there. So to help me do this, like I say, I'm not alone. I've got Ken Ammi with me, and Ken Ammi is a long-time researcher and lecturer on issues pertaining to worldwide philosophies and various sorts of religions. Now, in this capacity, he has posted thousands of articles on his website. No, he really has. And has been published in an, you ready? Apologetics journal, and has been interviewed for radio and podcast programs. It's the second time here on the show. Second time lucky. Didn't butcher the bio this time. Ken Ammi, welcome back to KBS, brother. How you doing, sir?
Most excellent. Thank you for having me back. It's an honor to be with you and your audience again.
Well, I'm looking forward to today, my good friend, because we are going to ruffle some feathers. And like I said to you,
if they want to drag us anywhere, why don't they drag us into a debate about these issues?
Now, that is something we can talk about as today's show goes on. But before we get anywhere, how have you been since we last spoke? Have you been keeping well, keeping safe?
Quite well, indeed. Been focusing on my latest project. Been dealing with some interesting weather in terms of snow.
Oh dear, you having to handle the snow, Ken? Not good. Not good.
It's not for me. I'm getting too old for that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even though I'm from Scotland, I am definitely a warm weather kind of guy.
Yes.
So, before we get into the real information here, I wanted to ask you, what was it that inspired you to write this particular book that we're going to be talking about today, Ken?
That's interesting because that book you read is it depends how you count them, my fourth or sixth one on Nephilim and Giants. So it all goes back to one of my early interests in life. I remember back when I was in 6th grade, so 11 years old, I would get on my bicycle and ride many, 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 many blocks to this place called the library, where they have these things that are called books. And I would go and read about my favorite subjects, which were cryptozoology, aliens and UFOs, and witchcraft. That's what I was interested in as a child and have been all along. And so when I started reading the Bible seriously, I started thinking, I wonder, I would like to research the paranormal in the Bible. All these beings that are not God, and they're not earth dwellers. They're in this in-between realm. So that led me to research and write about angels, cherubim, seraphim, demons, the devil, Satan, and Nephilim Giants, and many other critters that the Bible mentions. And so I wrote a book about Nephilim and Giants in the Bible, and I thought, well, that'll be my only book about this issue, so I'm done. And so, incidentally, in that book, I threw in a whole chapter about old newspaper accounts of giant skeletons and the Smithsonian conspiracy, and a review of that famous skeleton chart that you see a lot online made by Joe Taylor. And okay, I thought I was done. But then I wrote another one, and then another one, and then another one, just to cover all the ground I could imagine. So I wrote one about the Bible. I wrote one about extra-biblical texts, so Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha. Then I wrote one about what scholarly academics have to say about this stuff, and then one about the one you read, the one about what I call pop researchers have to say about it. So these are people who are not necessarily credentialed, but who are very, very, very popular in speaking on these issues, and some of them literally make their living off of it, if you can imagine that. So that's kind of what led me in this direction, is my overall lifelong interest in reality and figuring out what it was in the paranormal.
Now, Ken, I will be the first to admit that I'm even reluctant to call myself a Christian, and I'll tell you why. It's because I'm not very well versed in the Bible. I have a personal relationship, a personal understanding of what I believe God, Jesus Christ to be, and everything else like that. However, I've always been turned away by the Bible because, A, so many versions. The whole King James thing, that kind of puts me off as well. The fact it's been edited, books taken out. And for me, it's more a book written and edited by man than something coming directly from God. Now, that's just my opinion. That's why I'm very reluctant even to class myself as anything. And I was really shocked, really taken aback today, because like I've told you, it's probably no word of a lie to say hundreds of hours on topics that touch upon the Nephilim, the Giants, things like that. And here was me expecting to find maybe, I don't know, several books dedicated to the subject in the Bible. At least numerous books anyway. But Ken, talk to the audience about the actual source material. What the Bible has to tell us about the Nephilim, because I think that alone might actually shock some people.
Yes, and let me just make a general statement that as you keep looking into the Bible, I think you'll find like it's a lot of the issues you've tackled in the past, that when you put brand new eyes on it, you'll see it in a whole different light. But
yeah.
that might take time. For instance, every time I read the Bible cover to cover, I read a different version. So I can tell you from experience, the differences are minute, to say the least, to say the most, actually. So now, if we want to focus on what the Bible itself says about Nephilim, we have a grand total of 2 what we call verses. I'm not a big fan of fragmenting the Bible into verses, right? Because that wasn't done until the 1500s AD, and I find that it's had a terrible effect of breaking complete thoughts into thought fragments. And this is where a lot of taking texts out of context to make pretext or proof text comes from, is dividing things up like that. But yeah, the word appears 3 times. once in one verse and twice in a different verse. And so one of the ways that you, if you're so inclined to concoct what ends up being tall tales about this stuff, is you water down the terminology so that then you can incorporate a lot more material from around into your. So now I think I wonder if you'll agree, having read that one book of mine, that my responses to the material is not abstract. I'm not talking about like deeply theological or philosophically abstract issues that are like incomprehensible unless you've had a lot of background. I was just basic common sense stuff. This word does not mean what you say it does, and so you can't connect it to the next dot you're trying to connect it to, and so you can't draw this narrative just because of very, very basic level stuff that you really should be getting just from reading the material or looking into it. That's one of the amazing things. So I always say that a lot of these guys are clearly solid researchers, and they provide data points, right? So that the data points, I find, will often be solid, verifiable. But the problem is how they connect those dots, because they connect them through a certain worldview or a certain theology, or well, who knows? I mean, I can't read their motivations, but what I can do is read their ultimate conclusions and the arguments which get them there. And unfortunately, I've been able to poke holes in it, because a lot of what is being claimed is simply not substantiated by just a basic level reading of the texts.
And I must admit, you have put it in very good layman's terms, because I was easily following along with what you were saying, where you were coming from, and I could also put it into the context of shows that I've done. And I could start to see how a lot of the information, and let me emphasize this is not an attack on anyone who has been on KBS to talk about giants. I don't roll like that. I don't set people up like that. It's highly unprofessional. I would love it if some of these people would come on and speak with Ken and speak with other people who hold alternate ideas, an alternate view of the same source material. So let's get that out of the way first. For anyone out there, don't be running away to any of my prior guests that have been on and say, oh, Kev Baker, he's talking ill about you. He's making rubbish of everything you've done. Listen, we're after truth. We're trying to get to truth here. There's a lot of noise out there, and Ken is going to help us separate that noise from a definite signal. And there's something in there. So, Ken, I think maybe the best place to start, and you can take this any way you want to go, because I'm here for you, brother. I think maybe the best way would be to define to the audience what these different terms are, i.e. the Nephilim, the Raphaim, and sons of God, daughters of man. I'm going to hand it over to you to give the audience a kind of breakdown of the terminology involved, okay?
Yes, thank you. And I agree with you, by the way. For me, this is not about personalities. It's not about personal attacks. It's not about emotions. This is just about facts. That's all. And I personally welcome people criticizing what I say and pointing out where I might be mistaken. I mean, why wouldn't I be if I'm interested in the truth? I am 100% open to that. So one thing that is fascinating about the Nephilim is, considering how little the Bible says about them, they have been an issue of discussion for millennia. For millennia. And it probably is because the Bible says so little about them that people love to fill in the gaps. And with a lot of material that's been written about them, especially in the Second Temple era, which is, let's say, a couple of hundred years before the time of Jesus, it was a time of wild speculation, and we don't really know why they were writing what they were writing. So was it that they were claiming divine revelation, or were they claiming to have found a new source of information about this, or were they writing historical fiction? I mean, who knows? We don't know, but we can look at the material and consider it. Now, the first place the term Nephilim appears is Genesis 6, and I'm going to read a few, basically 4 verses in Genesis 6 are the key right here. When men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And so you hit the nail on the head in that within this very succinct statement, all of a sudden you're having to deal with who are the sons of God, who are the daughters of men, who are the Nephilim, when was all of this, when was after that, and maybe even people who focus on the 120-year thing, which I haven't really wrapped my mind around yet. So that's part of the fascination. It's so succinct that people really want to understand it, and then it leads into all these directions, Sethites, angels, demons, all this stuff.
It's our brains. I think our brains are hardwired to take something like that, which is quite vague, very succinct, like you put it, and then almost to create our own little narratives around it to make it more understandable. It's the way our brains work, I think, Ken.
More understandable, and there's also people who like to, as they say in the business world, find a niche and fill it.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So now I'm the Nephilim guy. If you really want to know, then I'm the one. I'm the guy. I got all the insights, and I've done all the research, and that's just part of human nature as well. That's just part of what we're dealing with here. And so the first issue is who are the sons of God? And just to give you a shortcut, because I did write a book just about and the earliest people who commented about this stuff, who were Jews and Christians, who had what to say about them, who took what view. And so that book covers the few hundred years BC until about 500 AD. So almost a millennia worth of, or the earliest Jews and Christians, who the majority of them took the sons of God, the angels. And probably the easiest shortcut for that would be Job 38:7, where the sons of God, at the very least, witnessed the creation of the earth. So they're definitely not humans. Now, also, one thing you'll find throughout the Bible is that angels are always described as looking just like human males. No wings, no halos, just exactly like human males. And there's no biblical statement about them shape-shifting or taking on physical bodies to interact with us. There's nothing like that whatsoever. So just the logical conclusion is that they are naturally embodied in a sort of flesh of their own, which I always correlate to how Jesus is post-resurrection, and that he's physical enough to be touched, to eat, but he can also be visible or invisible, so that they have access to other realms or dimensions or whatever you want to call them. But they're essentially physical beings, just unfallen, right? Glorified. And so this explains something in the text, which is that it's only sons of God with only daughters of men. Whereas if you're starting to say something like that, the sons of God are Sethites, right? Descendants of Seth, and the daughters of men are Cainites, descendants of Cain, then you do have to wonder, why exclusively male Sethites? Why exclusively female Cainites? Why? Well, but the angel view explains that, because all angels are male, so they have to mate with females. And also the Sethite Cainite thing, is essentially a latecomer as far as an explanation. And I think it was finally all but made the most popular by Augustine of Hippo. And just to comment on him for a second, I think what was going on with him is that he became a Christian by converting from Manichaeanism, which was a form of Gnosticism, and Mani did hold to the angel view. Well, Augustine wanted to be rid of everything that was Manichaean, so I think he dumped this view, motivated by that. So I honestly think that's part of the sort of psychology behind why Augustine made this view so popular. But the thing is, the Sethite Cainite view is based on a myth that there was some holy, righteous line of Sethites and then a wicked, sinful line of Cainites. That's just not in the Bible. It doesn't exist. So then, with the view that they're angels, then you do end up with Nephilim being hybrids. They're half angel, half human. Okay, now at this point, this is recording a pre-flood event, right? And if you notice, we don't have a physical description of Nephilim in this text. We're told that they were mighty, they were renowned, but and we know who their parents are, but that's it, right? That's about it. So as far as this text is concerned, that's all we know at this point.
We know they were hybrids. Where does the extrapolation from that come that they were giants? And does it?
Okay, now we're going to move to the second reference to Nephilim in the Bible. And hopefully, when you get to it, you don't read the whole chapter for context. No, you just pick up one verse and you run with it. So, pay no attention to the narrative. Just pick a verse and go with it, So here it is. And this is Numbers 13:33. So this is post-flood, okay? So now we got Nephilim pre-flood, and now we got Nephilim post-flood. It states that there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of God, the sons of Anak. That's the Anakim, the sons of Anak who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. So that's where you get the idea that they were extremely tall.
Yeah.
In comparison, the Israelites are viewing themselves as being like grasshoppers, and Nephilim are looking at them that way as well. And so here you have post-flood Nephilim. You have Nephilim related to the Anakim, and you have Nephilim, physical description of them being very, very tall. Okay, now, since this is our only second verse to mention Nephilim, and that's it, then those three claims are based on one single verse, which is this one. Typically, there's a concept called hermeneutics, which is really the science about how to understand any text, how to read it for context, how to not read into it, and all these things. One of the principles of hermeneutics is never build a doctrine on one verse. So that's something to keep in mind. Should we really have claim we have all this knowledge about Nephilim beyond what Genesis 6 told us based on one verse? But hey, it's in the Bible, right? I mean, I've been told many, many times. Bible, God inspired it. It's right there. So, but is that really what the narrative is telling to us? Okay, so let me review the narrative a bit. And this is absolutely key because you'll find that this is the mother of all Nephilim texts. This is the mother. This is it. This tells you, this almost paints the whole picture for you, the picture that's being proposed more so at a pop level than not. Although a lot of scholars actually mirror the pop stuff, which is all that much more disappointing. Anyhow, Numbers 13 has Moses sending spies into the land of Israel, right, to check it out before they enter.
Hold that thought, Ken.
And
Hold that thought. We are
yes,
tight
sir.
on the
I hear the
break
music.
already. Wow, we will be back after this giant. No, it's only a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Second part of today's Kev Baker Show with the amazing Ken Ammi. And we are getting into the truth about the Nephilim. We're going to separate the facts from the fiction. And just before the break, Ken, you were starting to lay out the actual narrative. And then the music came along. We're back now. I don't want to waste any time, brother. I'm going to hand it right back to you. I'm as fascinated as the rest of the audience here. And again, thank you for your time, taking time out to do this for us. And I think everybody is going to learn something new today. And that is what it's all about. So Ken, back to you, brother.
Now, covering the narrative of Numbers chapter 13 will really teach you virtually everything you need to know about how to understand this issue and how it's being presented to us. So let's dig right in. So the spies are spying out the land of Israel for 40 days. They come back, okay? Now I'm going right to the text starting at verse 26. They brought back word to them, to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of Negeb, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. So they brought up to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak who come from the Nephilim, and we seem to ourselves as grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. Okay, so you see there's kind of a little debate in the middle of that. First, they present their report, and it's accepted as is. But then you note that Caleb quieted the people. So something happened, right? Well, we need to think about the historical context and the cultural context, which is that these people at this time were itinerant tent dwellers living in the wilderness, right? All of a sudden, they're confronted with large cities with walls and that are well fortified and protected, and they are, at the very least, intimidated.
As you would be,
right?
As you would be.
Yeah. Right? And so Caleb quieted the people. He's like, you know what? God commanded us to do this. This is what we need to do. Let us go up at once and occupy it, right? But the other spies counter-argue. And this is where we need to draw a very clear distinction. Because then the narrative tells us that they brought up a bad report, often translated as evil reports. What happened? First, there's a report that's accepted as is, then this exchange with Caleb, and then something different, a bad report. So now you'll notice that they had twice referred to the people of the land as being strong. All of a sudden, in the bad report, they say that all the people in the land are of great height. So that's an embellishment right there, right? Why didn't you mention that before? Why is it only now that your back's against the wall, right, and you're cornered?
And
Okay.
Ken, if it was us, if it was you or I, and hypothetically we came across a city of massive giants, I don't think my first description would be strong. I think I would be kind of taken with the massive size of them, right?
Right. So that's an embellishment. And in fact, moreover, would your first impression when you ran back to camp be, hey guys, check out this fruit?
Exactly.
And that's the first thing you would say?
Yeah.
Really? Check out this fruit? And then you talk about the land?
I'd be running back to the camp and saying, guys, pack up the tents. We're out of here.
Yeah.
We don't stand a chance against those massive giants.
Yeah. So just the way it's laid out their reaction doesn't make sense. Let's talk about fruit. Let's talk about the land. Let's talk about cities. Let's talk about the people. Only eventually mentioning the most notable beings on the planet.
Exactly. That doesn't make sense, Ken.
No. Now, you'll notice in the as is report, the original one, they say it's a good land that flows with milk and honey. But in the bad report, they say the land devours its inhabitants. So that's a contradiction right there. Okay. Now, in the first report, they're able to specify all the people they saw: the Anakim, the Amalekites, the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Canaanites. Why do they only mention the Nephilim in the bad report? Why don't they mention them along with all the other people groups they saw? So that's a problem right there. Not to mention, they're able to specifically geographically pinpoint where these people are. The Amalekites are in the Negev, Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites in the hill country, Canaanites by the sea in the Jordan. But when they mention the Nephilim, you'll notice they don't mention where they saw them. They just, yeah, we saw them. Well, would you mind telling us where? Because we're supposed to go into this land. Maybe, we need to know where they are. So that's a missing data point right there, which is suspect at the very least. And so what happens is they are rebuked for this bad report. Now, what you'll often be told is that they were rebuked because they were being unfaithful and disloyal, which is true. It is true. But it is the content of the report that is problematic. We already saw they embellished. We already saw they contradicted themselves. We already saw that they were adding to the original report. And now note that they make 3 claims about which the whole entire rest of the Bible knows nothing. That there's post-flood Nephilim, that they are related to the Anakim, and that they're very tall. None of that exists anywhere else in the whole entire Bible. And so they also contradict Moses, Joshua, Caleb, God, and the rest of the Bible, because all of them make specific statements about that the Anakim were in the land, but none of them say a single word about Nephilim ever, never. And so we have various descriptions of the people who lived in the land and the people that lived around the land, and of battles and even hand-to-hand combat. And Nephilim don't appear in any of it. None of it. None. So in order to believe in post-flood Nephilims, that they're related to Anakim, that they're very tall, and that they were actually there, you have to rely on unfaithful, disloyal, self-contradictory, embellishing, inspecific spies who were rebuked for what they said. You actually have, I mean, who would do that in your normal life, right? Would you believe somebody like that? And yet, this statement is the one upon which the whole theory of post-flood giant Nephilim is based. It's this statement. You actually have to believe it in order to argue that.
That's like believing a specific theory on whatever subject, almost as if you're getting your source material from somewhere like Godlike Productions or Before It's News, one of these really questionable forums where it's 99% fiction, in my opinion, and you're taking that that fictional piece of work, as almost the cornerstone of everything, and building around that. That's insane.
It is, because it's a mere assertion, and I have to apologize. It looks like my lamp just died, so I'm going to be in the dark a little bit here.
Oh, Steve Quayle's got the voodoo doll out, man. I'm telling you. It's because you've got your Giant Killer Team t-shirt on. That's what it is, Ken.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm wearing this special for you tonight.
Yeah, see, I love it, dude. I love it. But this is already for me, and I would hope the audience are following along here. We can already see that there's a lot of problems, very problematic, especially if something so questionable, to put it mildly, is at the heart of all of this, Ken.
It is. Now, what's interesting is in Deuteronomy 1:28, Moses is relating this event. And when he's talking about how the spies tried to scare the people, he mentions that they claimed that the people of the land were of great height, but he absolutely ignores the Nephilim. He doesn't say a single word about it, as if it's a non-issue, right? Because my conclusion is what these guys were doing is just concocting a tall tale. It was a don't go in the woods type of fear-mongering scare tactic. That's how scared they were. They did not want to go into the land and do this, and so they reached back into their ancient memory, their own folklore or myth or legend, which was actually based in history. And actually, there's a comment I want to make about that. And they were saying, no, we saw these things you've known about from our ancient stories. We saw them. Yeah, we saw them there. But that's all it is. So this is the caliber of people you have to believe in order to weave tall tales, literally tall tales about Nephilim.
Wow. Now, what does the Bible give us in terms of defining the difference between tall people and a giant, Ken? Because there should be a distinction there, right?
There should. And the thing is, there's no biblical word for what we commonly think of as giant. There's no Hebrew word for that. And incidentally, even the English word giant is problematic. I can think of 5 or 6 different definitions for it. And that's part of the problem in this field of research, is people will jump into a discussion about giants with none of them bothering to define the term. So the Bible talks about people who are tall and people who are very tall, such as we saw here, a great height. But that's subjective, right? And so we get a description of King Saul, who we're told was notable because he was a head and shoulder above the average person in Israel. Now, see, that's one of the problems, that it's subjective. So what we do know is that Israelites of biblical days, males, average 5 feet even, or 5'3". And so all these comparisons are being made to them. So Saul being a head and shoulder above everybody else, who knows? He might have been 6 feet, 6'5", but to them, that was really notable.
Standing at 5'6" tall in my socks, I would look at somebody like LeBron James, and he would feel like a giant to me. Doesn't make him a giant, though, by definition, right?
Well, but that's just the point, though. What is the definition,
exactly.
Right? So that's part of the issue, is when the Bible says that someone's tall, it's compared to a guy that's 5 or 5'3". Well, very tall. Okay. Very tall to someone who's 5 or 5'3".
Exactly.
So 6.5 feet, 7.5 feet. Wow. I mean, we just don't know because those terms are vague and subjective. That's just a simple fact. Now, when it comes to specific heights, the Bible tells us 2, period. In the entire Bible, 2 specific heights. That's it. One of them is an unnamed Egyptian man who was 7'5". And the other one is Goliath. Okay, now, I've heard a million times that Goliath was a Nephil. But he wasn't. He was a Repha. I know you asked me about Rephaim earlier, so we're working our way towards that. He was a Repha, and the issue is the Greek manuscripts to the Old Testament have him being just shy of 10 feet. And the Hebrew ones, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls and even statements by Flavius Josephus, have him at being just shy of 7 feet. What I've reckoned is that the thing is the Greek version was being translated in Alexandria, Egypt, and the common Egyptian cubit was a bit longer than the common Hebrew cubit. So it seems to me as the translators just said, oh, cubit. They just used their own instead of doing the actual calculations, right, to convert the Hebrew cubit to the Greek cubit. So that's why he ends up being taller in Greek than he is in Hebrew. So yeah, I mean, having Goliath at just shy of 7 feet, that is still incredibly tall for that day. Especially when the focus isn't really on his height. It's that he was a champion. He was an experienced warrior. That was the issue. But then, incidentally, I know a lot of people talk about, well, him and even the Egyptian men were said to carry spears that were as thick as weaver's beams, and Goliath had all this armor on that was very heavy. And it's like, well, okay. First of all, Goliath had an armor bearer. He was carrying the shield in front of him, so he had help with his equipment. Second of all, what we're told about the Egyptian man is that one of David's soldiers attacked him, took his spear away from him, and killed him with it. So a regular-sized guy was able to wield that sort of spear. And you can go to strongman competitions and weightlifting, powerlifting competitions today and see guys that are just right around 6 feet who can lift 1,000 pounds. You don't necessarily have to be tall to be that strong.
No, you're absolutely right. I call these individuals freaks in the nicest possible sense of the word. I really, really do. Now, this Rapha that you're talking about here,
yeah.
Where do they come into the story? Who are they, Ken?
Now, let's start with the root word, Repha. Okay, it's a notoriously complicated term because it has a range of meaning that can go all the way from healing to death. Okay. And that's quite a range. I mean, imagine,
so it goes all the way from light to dark. You pretty much got everything in between, right?
I mean, healing or death. Like if I tell you, oh, I heard so-and-so wasn't feeling well, how are they doing? You say, Repha. Well, is he okay or dead? I don't know. So what happens is that since the word can mean death or the dead, then you have certain statements in the Bible about, for example, the Giborim Rephaim. Just the mighty dead, but that's all that it means, is mighty people who now died. But because of that, then you get the weaving of these tall tales about how Rephaim are the deceased spirits that somehow manifest on the earth, and I don't see any of that whatsoever. The thing is that there's a people group who are called the Rephaim. And as far as I can tell, they're just good old-fashioned 100% human. So Rephaim becomes a main category under which there's subcategories, like we might say nation, state, city, stuff like that, or clan, tribe, family, right? So you have Rephaim, under which the subcategories are Zamzumim and Anakim and a couple of others, under which are like Philistines. So that's why Goliath is a Philistine, so he's an Anak, so he's a Repha. See what I mean? But the only thing unusual that we hear about them is that the Anakim were quote-unquote tall. That's it.
And as you've kind of laid out there, compared to the average person in the area at the time, that could mean 6 foot. It doesn't necessarily mean some Jack kind of climbing the beanstalk type of story and giants that we're used to from fairy tales, right?
Right. And now this gets us into the issue of terminology again, because if you look at an average English Bible, you'll see many instances of the word giant. Okay, so that we got to talk about why that is. Now, in the Bible, we already talked about Nephilim and Rephaim, and the im ending is just a masculine plural. So really, singular is Nephil and Repha, and they sound nothing alike, okay? But for some unknown reason, we don't know why, the translators of the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, they rendered Nephilim and Rephaim both as gigantes. And incidentally, they also rendered Gibborim as gigantes. So they rendered 3 different words using just one word, which is just a terrible idea. I can't even call that translating. That's why I'm saying rendering. That caused confusion, which haunt us to this day, because then the English Bibles just picked up on gigantes and rendered it giants. So now you have giants, where the Hebrew behind it is that only 3 times is the word giant rendering Nephilim. All the other times it's rendering Repha or Rephaim. Now, fortunately, at least, the English versions have dropped rendering Gibborim or Gibbor as giants, because it really doesn't make any sense. I mean, Gibbor and Gibborim, it's just a descriptive term. It just means might or mighty. That's why you even have a reference to God as El Gibbor, right? Gibbor and Gibborim. It's used of Nephilim. It's used of good old-fashioned human beings like David's soldiers. It's used of angels. It's used of God, because it just means might or mighty. But you will have some of these pop researchers concoct very elaborate scenarios about Nimrod and how he is described in the histories of all these ancient peoples under different names, and how he's actually going to be the Antichrist. I mean, it's very elaborate. But it's all based on the fact that Nimrod is referred to as having become a Gibbor. And they say, well, oh, Gibbor, but the Nephilim are referred to as Gibborim. Therefore, Nimrod somehow, through cultic means, is the favorite description, was somehow became a Nephil. And I'm saying that there's no indication of that whatsoever. The text is telling you Nimrod was a regular guy who then became mighty. Period, full stop. That there's just nothing else to it. Nothing else. And so if you want an example of the oddity it is for the Greek version, in Genesis 6:4, like we read that the Nephilim became mighty men. Well, in the Greek, it says that the gigantes became gigantes, which just, it doesn't even make sense, because you don't become something you already are. So that just shows you what problems it causes to render more than one word with one word. So the problem is people read an English Bible and they chase the word giants around a Hebrew text. And it just ends up not making sense, because I've been told about 1 million times by people, oh, the Old Testament is full of post-flood Nephilim. Just look at how many times it refers to giants. Well, wait a minute. Why are you jumping from a very specific Hebrew term, Nephilim, to a very vague, generic, subjective, and undefined English term, giants? You need to see what's behind. And even if you didn't, incidentally, the fact that Nephilim lived before the flood, it should really make you wonder how it is that they appear after the flood. And that's a whole issue right there. That is an enormous topic right there.
And we're almost coming on the break now, Ken, so I don't want
Perfect
to let
timing
you
then.
set off anything. Let people know where they can keep up to date with your work, where they can check out your books, how to follow you on social media. Let the audience know all that, brother.
It's very simple. Just go to truefreethinker.com, one word, True Free Thinker, And then everything's accessible there, all the social media links and books and everything. Because, I hear these guys, when you say something like that, they'll spend 5 minutes, Twitter this, Facebook that, YouTube the other one. Just go to truefreethinker.com and everything's there for you.
And we've got a couple of minutes before we go to the break, so without getting into anything too big, we were talking before the show.
Too big, huh? That's very punny.
I'm full of the puns today, brother, I'm telling you. But we were talking about a massive problem, and that problem is that when you go to talk to any of the people who do speak regularly, and like you said, make a career, a living out of talking about the Giants, I don't see too many of them taking you up on the offer, Ken. Not many of them at all, right?
I'll tell you a quick story. So over the past few years, something interesting has happened in Japan, which is a mixed martial artist has been challenging kung fu masters, and he's been beating them to pulps. Because he said these guys are martial arts masters, but they're in the decades they've been in martial arts, they've never had a real fight, ever. So they have a fight with him, and they lose. And so I got me thinking, I don't know everything, but I'm not aware of a single one of these pop researchers who has had to defend their view in a debate. And I would love to debate any of them. And again, I'm not saying that as some kind of bravado, chest pounding thing. I'll show you what for, but just let's get this out on the open. Let's lay out our cases and let's have a discussion to see where the chips may fall. But I can unfortunately say that a few of them already don't want to discuss it.
We'll be back after the break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and yes, the music said the New World Order is going down. I'm not so sure, but I get a funny feeling some of these people that talk about the Giants might be going down sometime soon, and that's because I have got the man himself, Ken Ammi. And yes, you can probably hear the smile in my voice right now. I'm so happy with how this is going because this is exactly what I wanted to provide you, the audience. I wanted you to hear something new, something different, but something that is entirely based on the facts, as little as they may be. And as Ken has done a really good job so far, we've been here an hour laying this out. This topic for me, we've got the 6 fingers, we've got the 6 toes, we've got the ginger-haired ones, we've got the giants in Kandahar cave, all that good stuff that I have been here talking about for years. How much of that will stand up to the test of what we're talking about today with Ken Ammi? And please check out his website. Really easy. It's truefreethinker.com. That's truefreethinker, one word, .com. So I got there in the end, right? Ken, back to you because hang on, what have I done now? What have I done? Oh no.
No, I'm just I'm laughing because it's free thinker, but the way you pronounce it, it sounds like three.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's free. It's free. I know. I'm terrible, dude. I can hardly talk at the best of times. How I got a podcast, I do not know. I really don't. But Ken, let's get back into it. And you were about to jump into something huge. There are those puns again.
Bump, bump, bump. Yes, that's very punny. Very
Post-flood, pre-flood. What's happening there? Because I always thought that Noah built a boat to survive a flood that came along to wipe out all of these things. So did it go wrong? Were there remnants left? Talk to us, Ken. What happened there?
Right, so that is a main issue. Now, if you recall, Genesis 6:4 referred to how there are Nephilim on the earth in those days and also afterward, okay? Now, maybe when we first read it, that didn't really stand out at us. But then after you read Numbers 13:33, and there you have post-flood Nephilim, Then you take that and you use it to go back in time and interpret Genesis 6:4, so that those days, Genesis 6:4, pre-flood, and also after that, post-flood. Except Genesis doesn't say anything about that. You have to, again, you have to rely on the disloyal, unfaithful, rebuked spies who made up stuff, and then turn that into a hermeneutic, a worldview, whereby you then go and you misread other texts. Because the issue is, when we're at Genesis 6:4, the flood has not been mentioned yet, not even once. It's not mentioned until Genesis 6:13. It's not mentioned until a full 13 verses later, which is Genesis 6:17. So when you're reading Genesis 6:4, you can't jump to the flood, because if you're thinking about it chronologically, you don't know about the flood yet. You can't just artificially insert that into the text. So if it's not the flood, then what is it? Well, the verse told you. It told you when those days are. The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Right? Those were those days. And when was that? Well, verse 1 told us, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, took them wives, etc. So when was that? I have no idea. I mean, it could have been as early as when Adam and Eve's children started having children. But regardless, the only thing we're being told is that Nephilim were around in those days when it first happened, and after that, after it first happened, but it's still our pre-flood. There's no reason to read the flood into this text, except that you're going to take Numbers 13:33 and you're going to use it to misinterpret this text. So the text tells you when the days are, and after that is just after that, but still pre-flood. But see, you made a very important point, which is, if even part of God's purpose for the flood was to be rid of this whole mess with Nephilim, then any concept of post-flood Nephilim would imply that God failed. Bottom line, okay? So now what happened in modern day pop research is that two camps really broke apart, divided. One is the L.A. Marzulli camp, and one is the Rob Skiba camp. So Marzulli said the way that there's post-flood Nephilim is that after the flood, more angels fell, and they mated with women again, and they had Nephilim again, maybe once, maybe multiple times. But Skiba came along and said, well, there's nothing about that in the Bible, which is true. So Skiba said the way they mated post-flood, that they return post-flood, is genetically within the bodies of one of Noah's sons' wives. And that's how they returned post-flood. Of course, then I have to come along and tell Skiba, you told Marzulli he's wrong because his view isn't biblical, but your view isn't biblical either, because that is definitely nowhere in the Bible, not even hinted at. And so in order to get Nephilim past the flood, you literally have to invent just any way that you could think of to get them. They survived, or they returned, or whatever it is. You have to invent it because it's not there. It doesn't exist. And the worst part is all the arguments that they're going to concoct, they're based on, guess what? That one single verse, the bad, evil report. So
as I'm going to call it, the before it's news post. The one that was on the forum that really is questionable characters that are bringing us this, Ken, you know?
Yeah. But you see, the problem is they're pointing fingers at each other, and I'm kind of going, guys, both of you have the same problem. You're trying to support a rebuked bad report that's full of problems. You should never believe guys like that. And why are Nephilim missing from every and any other biblical tale for the rest of the whole Bible? So that's part of the problem right there.
Let me play Giants advocate here then, right? Instead of devil's advocate. What about a little bit of genetic manipulation, a little jiggery pokery that way, Ken? Anything like that going on? Can we point to anything?
Well, Rob Skiba recently told me personally that the Bible does describe genetic manipulation. And he told me it was in Genesis 6:5. Now I'm going to read it. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of his thought, of his heart, was only evil continuously. Let me see. And then, it goes on to talk about now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and people, it was corrupt. All flesh had corrupted their way. That's the verse. Okay. God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupt their way on the earth. Now, you don't have to know anything about the Bible to know that it's not referring to genetic manipulation, right? You could say that is what happened, but there's a difference between, say, for instance, hybrids such as Nephilim then going on to marry regular human women. And so you kind of have this trickle down of genetic mixing. Whether you want to call it manipulation would be, that's kind of getting anachronistic, right? That's the kind of thing that we think about is done by CRISPR or in the lab.
Yeah, I mean, me
nowadays,
having if I was to have a relationship with, say, for example, somebody Brazilian, if we were to have a child, it would be very bizarre to say, well, that was a bit of genetic manipulation going on over there, Ken. Look at that. That was almost natural genetic manipulation. You wouldn't describe it such a way, would you?
No. And I tell you where this becomes very problematic is, like L.A. Marzulli talks about how people often, well, I don't know about often, that people contact him sometimes and are concerned that their family members or their friends or they themselves might be Nephil. And he tells them, don't worry about it, they're not. I don't see how he could possibly say that within the context of his own claims, right? And so that is a phenomena that has happened. People are actually concerned that they themselves or their loved ones might be Nephilim. And that plays into the elaborate scenarios that these guys paint about the eschatology, the end times or the last days, where there's going to be a return of the Nephilim, where there's no such thing in the Bible. It just doesn't exist. And again, a return of Nephilim would imply that God failed. But so if you say to them, because many claim that Nephilim are already back, they're already on the earth. And so you say, well, I'd kind of like to see them. It'd be an interesting sight to behold, to say the least. But they say, well, no, because they've fine-tuned the genetic manipulation to the point where they're not going to appear to be gigantic anymore. Guess what? They're going to look exactly like human beings. So, okay, now this becomes incredibly dangerous, because what these guys are proposing is an end time scenario whereby we, the faithful ones, are going to have to literally battle it out with Nephilim. And the way you can identify them is they look exactly like human beings. I mean, that is incredibly dangerous. Let me give you an example. This is from someone online who goes by the pseudonym Watchman Mama. And she writes this: under the ice, referring to the Antarctic, okay? Under the ice, the giants, what the Bible calls the Nephilim, Genesis 6:4, are awakening. yes, these things are real, and they have no love for us. They are bound with copper shields and can only be slowed with copper-tipped ammunition, spearheads, your weapon at hand. You must destroy the head, according to Steve Quayle and other sources. What you can do to get ready, have solid copper-tipped ammo. Shoot for and destroy the giant's head completely. Okay, and so this is what is being told you need to do, whether they actually turn out to be very, very, very tall or look exactly like you and me. This is the kind of warfare these people are setting up for. I can only imagine that they recognize that it's just hyperbolic and they're not actually going to become militant, because this is incredibly disturbing.
It would be the ultimate grift if Steve Quayle was selling copper-tipped bullets on his website, wouldn't it? It would be priceless, right? But no, I see where you're coming from there. And some of the stories about Antarctica, again, we know it's somewhere we can't see. It's somewhere that's very occulted, out of the way. And whether you can get there, if you're military or not, another question. And that leaves this grey area where we've got everything from Atlantis to giants to alien technology. I've heard it all coming from Antarctica, Ken, but how much of it is based in fact? That's the question. And I love a good bit of woo. Don't get me wrong, man. I love a good bit of woo, but in the end of the day, the mission is to separate the signal from the noise. And the noise,
Yes.
It's horrendous, brother. It is.
And I found it interesting you mentioned the Kandahar giant, because in a way,
I love that story,
it's-
man. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me just, before I get there, just note this. I find it very entertaining to listen to these guys, because they're doing what I term theo sci-fi, right? It's very exciting stories, and boy, they're just rattling off the information. And unless you're slowing down to check them out, what they're saying, it's easy to be taken for a ride, because it is extremely exciting and interesting, especially if you're a sci-fi nerd like me.
Like me as well. And you're describing me to a T, brother. You're describing me to a T, because I came into all of this alternative information without that grounding of having read the Bible, anything like that. So I'm getting introduced to a lot of these topics by, like you say, brilliant orators. And nothing. They really know how to tell the story. And I'm as guilty as anyone. I used to be running back in from going on patrol at work and telling them this and that about this giant, that giant. Now I know why my mates were all nudging each other and I'm going, oh no, here he comes again, you know?
Well, but you might not be aware, but essentially every one of the top pop researchers has also written fictional novels about Nephilim and giants. And I think it's because what they are presenting when they claim to be doing fact-based theology is already fiction. So it's not that far of a stretch that they go on to write a fictional novel. That's essentially what they're doing already, God help them. So that's just an interesting aspect of it. How many of them actually produce works of admitted fiction based on their supposedly fact-based research? But what I was mentioning about the giant of Kandahar, Afghanistan, is it's somewhat alike the claims about Antarctica, right? Who has gone to Afghanistan, to Kandahar, to research this firsthand? So it's conveniently, first of all, to say that it was in Kandahar is an extremely vague statement, right? So it's a vague region. It's a generic description. It's in a place that's conveniently far enough away and inaccessible, with little to no media presence, so that nobody can double check any of it, right? And so the whole thing is based on a couple of guys making vague statements about generic regions, and they're being popularized by Steve Quayle and L.A. Marzulli, which is problematic, okay? For example, when I wrote an article about event that happened when a police officer saw a crop circle in Salisbury Hill, Wiltshire, England. The police officer was checking it out, and he said that he saw a group of people that were, quote unquote, over 6 feet tall. Okay, all over 6 feet. Now, when I put my shoes on, I'm over 6 feet tall. Believe me, it's not that impressive. But now, when Steve Quayle related this story, he told his audience that they were 7 to 8 feet tall. And then when Eli Marzulli related it to his audience, he said they were 8 to 9 feet tall.
Okay, so that's a bit of a stretch, literally. You know? Just a bit.
It's a stretch. And how did they grow 3 feet just going from the police officer to Quayle to Marzulli? I mean, the police officer is trained and experienced in determining height. These guys are trying to just have something to do for the day. Because imagine if your whole quote-unquote ministry is based on Nephilim and Giants, you literally have to make much ado about nothing in order to just keep it going day to day. So
and even
why?
And even to give them some slack, let me offer in that, like you say, when you are concentrating on one topic, whatever it may be, Giants in this case, confirmation bias is going to come into this. So you're going to start seeing everything as Giants. And even if that means you kind of elaborate a little bit on the 6 foot to the 7 foot, because it's to fit your narrative. It fits. It's a giant, right, Ken? You know? Even though, in reality, it's a report of people that are over 6 feet tall.
So, I mean, that's part of the problem, is you're getting the giant of Kandahar, Afghanistan story through Quayle and Marzulli, and it is heartbreakingly a shame that it does turn out those guys are very unreliable. I mean, when it comes to the bottom line. Now,
and there is interesting stuff about, you know, the Iraq war that I think is factual, in that the special forces went to the museums, places like this, and that can be a big supporting factor in Giant of Kandahar or anything you can spin off from that area. Would you agree?
There does seem to have been collecting from museums. There was the issue of a claim that they found Gilgamesh's body. There's all this stuff. And one of the main problems is, again, when you try to track down the facts, mostly it turns into, well, I heard so-and-so who heard so-and-so say so-and-so that they heard from so-and-so, and it's incredibly frustrating, but that's just the kind of data that we're dealing with when it comes to most of these things. It's so hard to narrow it down and pinpoint it. It's just like what I said about how I wrote about this Smithsonian conspiracy, or the newspaper accounts about giant skeletons from the late 1800s and early 1900s, and all of that stuff. It's all things that you have to really slow down and really go over with a fine-tooth comb, unless, you know, you do just want to spin tall tales that are very fun to tell and then move on with your life, I suppose.
What about the 6 fingers and 6 toes? Can I stop looking for them on questionable characters now?
Okay, so the 6 fingers, 6 toes, we're often told it's a Nephilim trait. Okay, the problem is you're not going to get that from the Bible or from, you know, real life experience. The Bible states that one single person had 6 fingers and 6 toes. That's it, one. So how you turn that into a trait, I certainly don't know. And moreover, that one person was a Repha. He was not a Nephil. So there goes that part of the claim as well. I mean, there's just nothing to it, nothing. Of course, nowadays, we know it's just a simple genetic mutation. Just the information to build fingers got doubled, and it grows an extra one. But there's no indication that that has anything to do with genetic manipulation or the paranormal or hybrids or nothing. So that's a biblical non-issue.
You've mentioned the Smithsonian a couple of times now. I've had on Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman when they had released their book on the Giants, and I can see a big smile on your face, brother.
Yeah.
I'm glad you've not listened to my show throughout the years. You probably wouldn't agree to come on here. But talk to us about that then. What's with the Smithsonian? I thought they had got rid of all the evidence, right?
What's interesting is just this week, I was making an addition to one of my books based on an article written by Jim Vieira. So it's very quantum entanglement that you happen to mention him. And I did have to take issue with a lot of the things he said about Nephilim and Giants. I mean, it was just not solid information. Again, I'm really sad to say. I've heard it a million times that whenever a quote-unquote giant skeleton, again, that's subjective, right? But okay, the Smithsonian swoops in and they take possession of it, and they either hide it in their Indiana Jones warehouse or destroy it or dump it into the sea or whatever they might do at any given time.
I like it, the Indiana Jones type warehouse. I like that, dude. I'm going to save that one.
There's many problems related to this, part of which actually ties in directly to the newspaper reports about giant skeletons. The information I have been able to track down about the Smithsonian collecting skeletons, it turns out that they were of people who were about 7 feet tall, right around there. And yeah, they were unusual for being in Native American regions, since Native Americans also traditionally were relatively short, like the ancient Israelites. But that there's some major conspiracy, I could not uncover anything that was really fact-based. And unfortunately, there's an extremely well-known article online about how the Supreme Court forced the Smithsonian to admit that they've been collecting and destroying these skeletons. The thing is that the website that produced that article is a satire website. And you'll know they don't provide a court case number. There's a person they quote in the article who doesn't exist, who works for an archaeological organization, which also doesn't exist. That hoax, literally, just like the Kandahar giant.
And a lot of the images that we see as well, and we're about to be going to the break here, but I've been led to believe that there was a Photoshop competition at one time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the images we're used to seeing are nothing more than somebody like me playing with Photoshop. But we'll come back on the other side. We've only got one segment to go of what has been a giant show. We're getting rid of some giant myths out there. We'll be back after the break. Can't believe it. It's the final segment of today's show already with Ken Ammi. I'm already thinking about when I can get this guy back on here, because I am really enjoying this. Separating the facts from the fiction on all things giant and Nephilim. And there's very few facts to go on, but there's a heck of a lot of fiction for us to wade through. And Ken, we've got one segment left, and this is where I offer you the chance to get into whatever you think is most important for the listeners to take away from today's show. So if we want to go back to anything you've touched on, wherever you want to go, brother, I'm with you.
Appreciate it. Biblically, Nephilim are essentially a non-issue. They existed pre-flood. The flood was the end of them. They did not come back. They never will. Full stop, period, end. And that's not very exciting. But those are the
That's what
facts.
it is, but that's what it is.
Rephaim were just a human people group that Israelites had to battle. And some of them were subjectively tall, period. And that's also not very exciting, but that's what it is.
Now, there's one thing I do want to ask you, because I'm seeing pictures flying around in Discord and things, and I know you talk about Baalbek in the book. Now, I've often been heard about Baalbek being, built by giants and all these massive stones, and, to me, these are massive stones that no living man should be moving, right? But what would you say to people who would offer you that giants were involved in the building of Baalbek?
I would point out that we know how Baalbek was built. We've known that for over 100 years. Nobody says it was easy, but we have various descriptions. And I have an appendix in one of my books going over that information. So now there's a fundamental level fallacy, which is that to instantly conclude that large things must have been built for and by large people, where that's just not necessarily the case. I mean, there's a door where I work that's I've estimated to be 25 feet tall, but I've been working there a long time and I've never seen no giant walking through that door. Now, I'll grant you, it's not like we have boulders that weigh hundreds of thousands of tons. But the fact is that this information is out there. I mean, I know it's easy to say Nephilim and giants, just as it is to say aliens must have done it, But maybe I should make a general statement, which is that, I don't know, let's say that there did exist at some point in time and place giants, quote unquote, that were 10, 12 feet tall, 15, whatever. What do I care? I mean, good for them. That's not an issue for me. That's not the kind of dog I have in this fight. The kind of dog I have is a factual one. So I don't want what I'm saying to be taken to be denying more than I'm actually denying. I'm just saying, if such is the case, then let's see the facts. And it seems to me that something I lightly touched upon earlier, which is that at one time, humanity lived in close proximity to each other, okay? So there was commonly known and shared history. After the Tower of Babel event, humanity was dispersed throughout the earth, right? So they would have taken with them this commonly known and shared history. And it seems to me that with the passage of time and the telling and retelling and the embellishment, then that commonly known shared history would change in this or that point, which is why you end up with so many ancient cultures who have stories about a primordial garden, a flood, only a few survivors, and guess what? Stories of quote-unquote giants. Because eventually this commonly known shared history came to be called myth and legend. But it seems to me that this is where it all came from, just like when the Israelites went into the land, the spies brought up these characters from their ancient history, which by then, who knows, maybe it was folklore or myth or legend. But this is why they were able to appeal to this history of theirs. So it seems to me that's part of why there are all these stories throughout the world about unusually tall creatures, some that are just tall humans and some that are hybrids, or some that are chimeras of all sorts and kinds. That's what at the commonsensical level, I think it does derive from real stories. And so how many times can you tell the same story? Well, what you do is you embellish along the way so that Nephilim become gigantic, because that's just more exciting in the telling, right? Because again, we saw that we don't have a reliable physical description of Nephilim in the Bible. So you can't even claim that they were even 1 inch taller than average. In fact, I think it'd be delicious if it turns out Nephilim were little people, but that's just me.
I agree with you. Being a little person myself, I think that would be hilarious. It'd be almost like God getting the last laugh on people. Yep, if I dare say that, yeah. I think that'd almost be quite amusing.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not a humorist, and some people claim I'm not much of a humorist either. but humorism is when people claim that all the world's myths and legends are actually connected and or based on truth. I wouldn't say all of them, but I do think that there is something to that. And the problem that we're finding in these modern day pop researchers, along with some of the scholarly ones, incidentally, because I mean, I wrote a whole book about that too, and there are a lot of problems in scholarship as well, is that it's amazing to me that this Numbers 1333 deception is still deceiving us today. I mean, you take I'm going to name a name, someone of the scholarly caliber of Dr. Michael Heiser, and a lot of people in this field know that name, and he is absolutely credentialed and experienced, no question about it. But if you consider all the books he's written and all the peer-reviewed journal papers and his dissertation and his interviews and the videos he makes and the articles he writes online, his entire body of work, he fails to interact with the narrative of Numbers 13. It's just a simple fact. He merely picks up verse 33 and he runs with it, which is what's done by the pop researchers as well. And in all his material, he has only provided one single statement about the narrative of Numbers 13, and it's in the form of a footnote that's about a paragraph long, which is merely an assertion. So it's like very dismissive. It's like, oh, some people claim that they were exaggerating, but they weren't. So let's just move on. It's disappointing that even someone of his caliber would do that. But that is unfortunately what is being done in general. And this is why a lot of these people end up seeming as they have the same shtick, which they do. For instance, you take someone like Ryan Peterson. He might not be a very well-known name yet, but I know for a fact he didn't exist online, didn't exist. He publishes one book about Nephilim and Giants, and boom, he is absolutely everywhere, being interviewed, speaking at conferences. He's out there, he's living the dream, you know what I mean? So, I mean, I wish I could kind of get a hold of that kind of marketing, but it doesn't seem to be happening.
This is the thing that really, really confuses me, because I've been listening to you now on today's show. I've read most of the book and then flicked through the rest. I've had you on the show before. I've watched numerous shows that you've been interviewed on, and I don't get it. I don't get it because your information is, for me, just as exciting. It is just as good as any of the kind of tall tales, the more fictional stuff, the more out there kind of stuff. But maybe that's just me because I've got a thirst to get to the heart of the matter,
right,
because I want the answers. Right. So for me, it's really kind of bizarre how we don't see Ken Ammi on Coast to Coast, or we don't know more about you. It really, like I said to you during one of the breaks, I feel for you, man. I really feel for you, because it must be like banging your head off a wall.
Oh, and there's another way I bang my head against the wall, is because we humans, we tend to function in extremes, right? we take extreme positions and there's hardly anybody in the middle. Well, with the issue of Nephilim and Giants, the two extremes are the people who deny there's anything paranormal going on. So they'll deny the sons of God are angels. So the Nephilim are not hybrids. And so there goes that row of dominoes. There's essentially nothing to see here. Okay. On the other extreme, you have the guys that turn it into theo-sci-fi, where they're off into eschatology land, and they're throwing in UFOs and aliens, and now even that Bigfoot was in the field. I mean, you name it. Okay. Now, at one point I thought, well, let me look at the actual data and let's see what it actually states. And again, nothing I've said during this interview has been like super abstract, complex, quantum theology where nobody can really, it's just basic stuff, basic bottom line level stuff. And I found I ended up in the middle of those two extremes where I do affirm that there were hybrids. I do affirm sons of God were angels, but I deny post-flood Nephilim, or that they were quote-unquote giants, and the whole eschatology that comes with. So I get it from both sides. I'm always the monkey in the middle saying, I can't go this way, I can't go that way. I'm right in the middle. And so both extremes are constantly arguing against me. So if you look at the very end of the book, that's why I end up saying, I didn't set out to do that. I didn't set out to say, let's get together and sing Kumbaya and make peace. But that's where I ended up. And now I can tell both sides, neither of you have to give up very much in order to meet in the middle and understand biblically what we're told about this stuff. You just have to get off of your extreme high horses.
And there's definitely there's definitely a thirst for what you're calling theo-sci-fi. I would be one that would consume it right away. I would appreciate the honesty, and I would know what I'm going into. I would know it's a story as opposed to something factual. And now we've got 14, 15 minutes left. I don't want to take up too much time with my questions. One quick one. I seen it in Discord earlier on. Somebody was asking, and you might be the best person to ask here. Adam and Eve. We've all heard of Adam and Eve. They come down. Cain and Abel. Where did everyone else come from, Ken?
I'm just laughing because on the Discord, somebody posted these images of flying saucers and unicorns and KBS,
Yeah, that's usually, that sums up my show perfectly. I go all the way from the unicorns to UFOs. It's how I roll, dude. I'm the number one abnormal, paranormal show in this world and the next. That's my own. I've given myself that title,
Okay, so here's a circumlocution. Okay, if you think about what's generally known as Gnostic Christianity or Christian Gnosticism, which is an absolute contradiction in terms, they claim that the creator of this physical material realm was a lesser god who was arrogant and ignorant, if not senile, because it created the material physical realm. And in Gnosticism, it is ontologically wicked and corrupt, meaning in its very nature and essence, the physical realm is corrupt just because it is physical, because Gnosticism considers the physical to be corrupt and only spirit to be pure. Okay. And it's easy to think that is biblical Christianity, but it's not, because you ask any Christian, is the flesh wicked? Yes. Is spirit pure? Yes. But there's a fundamental difference, which is biblically God created the material realm, the physical realm, good. He meant to create it that way, and it was created good. But it underwent a fall. So it is after the fall that we can say, well, the flesh is wicked or the material realm is corrupt. It's only after that. But unlike Gnosticism, biblically, it is redeemable. It is still redeemable. And that's why Jesus came. And so you have God creating Adam and Eve, and you figure he's probably smart enough to create them genetically perfect, right? Front-loaded with enough genetic information so that generation after generation after generation, even due to the onset of post-fall genetic entropy, that they would be able to keep reproducing human beings after their own kind that would eventually start suffering genetically, but still they were so jam-packed with pristine genetic information initially that you could have generation after generation after generation still surviving, right? And so this is part of why early on you would naturally assume that Adam and Eve's children were marrying and having children with each other, because the genetics were still so pristine. They would not have had the problems that we would have today if we do that. And so you find that there's no commandment against doing that way back then. Later on, in the time of Moses, there do come commandments from God talking about how you don't marry close relatives. And you figure, well, why all of a sudden? Well, because apparently the genetic entropy was getting to the point at that point in time that it did start becoming a problem. And so you need to be very careful about this stuff. So anyhow, if there's times when the Bible is extremely succinct, right? Like in Revelation 12, there's a verse that talks about how Jesus was born, sat on a throne, and then was taken up into heaven. My point is, 3 decades worth of time are summed up in a little fraction of a verse, right? And that's what you find in Genesis 5. So in Genesis 4 is when it starts describing the birth of Cain and then Abel. And then in Genesis 5, multiple generations go by. They're just mentioned really quickly. So that by the time Cain gets married, there were plenty of people around for him to be married to, plenty of women, sisters or cousins, right? And so that's really the key, is taking the Bible seriously for what it says, which is that God created things good, and then it makes sense that that would be such that they could interbreed with each other, and it wouldn't have been a problem for many, many, many generations down the line, so that when they needed to get married, there were generations worth of people around.
Thank you.
That's the bottom line.
Thank you. That is, hands down for me, the best explanation I've ever heard of that really kind of controversial kind of point of conversation. That Connie, I think, has agreed. I'm sure there's other people out there who have never had it explained to them quite like that. The fact that the commandment comes later. And that makes sense. As somebody who's into science and following along what you say, the entropy getting to the point then where it is a problem. But back when it started, it wasn't the problem. So thank you. Thank you for that alone. On top of all the giant stuff, Ken. But we've got now 8 minutes left. And I promise I'll shut up this time. You get out there whatever you think the people need to hear, okay?
Well, it's been a massively huge, gigantic pleasure, for one.
Hasn't it just, hasn't it? It's been enormously rewarding for me as a host to have you on, I must admit. Can we stop with the puns now, can we? So what do you want people to take away from this? What would be, your kind of takeaway? We've been speaking for 2 hours now. Everyone's got an attention span of 9 seconds. Where do you want to go with this, Ken?
Okay, and I promise no more punishment. Okay, Rapunzel?
Damn, dude. You're good.
So one of the takeaways is there's people who are obviously very smart, very well read, very well researched, and they sound good doing it. That's not an issue. They're very impressive, and they're a lot of fun to listen to, and they have very interesting things to say. But every now and then, don't go crazy, but just pick like one subject and look at the top person teaching on that subject and try to figure out if what they're saying is reliable or not. Okay, that's one mistake people can make, is I'm going to look deeply into 100 different subjects. You're going to go nuts, okay?
Trust me, I'm living proof of that.
Yeah, I've had to learn that as my family grew, for instance. I only have a certain amount of time, and people tell me all the time, check this out, look at this, check this out. Nope, I'm focusing on what I'm focusing on, and maybe I'll get to that someday, and maybe I won't, and that's just how it is. So, in this case, start listening when you listen to people like Skiba and Marzulli and Quayle and all these guys. For instance, one thing I had to tell Skiba is, you know, Rob, you use the Hebrew word Nephilim, and then as you're speaking, then you throw in Rephaim, and then you throw in the English word giant, so that it's hard to follow what you're saying because you're jumping between languages, you're using specific terms along with generic ones, and so it'd be better if you could kind of just lead your audience to better understanding what you mean by being more consistent in your terminology. And unfortunately, even though to me that was an incredibly just basic level recommendation, he did not take it very well, and it's unfortunate. But listen for that. Listen for that. Stop and ask yourself, well, you know, this guy just said this, but it sounds like an assertion. And then just because he makes a statement and throws in a parenthetical Bible citation at the end of it, does that actually say what he just asserted? I'm going to have to look that up. And just kind of slow down when you're listening to this stuff, and ask yourself: is what is being presented, is it cogent, right? Is it sensical? Is it consistent? Or is it just a lot of exciting sounding stuff? And so again, I think this is the third time I'm going to emphasize this, which is, you'll notice I haven't said anything that's technically difficult. All my points are just basic level, simplistic. It only took me doing a ton of research to kind of boil it down to where, hey, these are the main issues, and they're very simple when you come down to it. And so don't be scared off by these guys who are weaving these exciting tall tales, because the bottom line will be, if you're focused on this particular issue, you will notice that their entire scheme is almost entirely based on that one verse, Numbers 13:33. And without it, you don't have the overwhelming majority of what they're claiming. And it's sad, but that's just a simple fact about what's going on out there, as it were. And there's also another aspect that's kind of sad for me, which is that you'll know most of those guys do not attend a church that's led by a pastor like the rest of us, hoi polloi, you know, us common people, gathering together as we're told that we should do, because they consider the average pastor as being just so far beneath them. Unless the pastor is talking about aliens and giants for every sermon, then they just don't get it. They haven't attained the level of knowledge we have. So they form their own churches, such as virtual churches online or home groups and all that. And there's something to be said for that, for having small home groups. But it's a problem when you start besmirching the mainstream normative church, where you could go and hear a very fine sermons every Sunday, because they're not talking theo-sci-fi, right? So you shouldn't be repelled by a good old-fashioned biblical sermon just because it's not exciting enough for you, because the truth should be exciting enough in and of itself. So anyhow, this has all been about claims and counterclaims, and me just laying out some of the facts about these issues that are verifiable. Anybody can look into this stuff and come to the same conclusions, and if they have any problems or questions, they can bring them up, and I'll be definitely more than glad to hear.
And for me,
hear them.
Just as entertaining, just as fascinating, and as somebody who I always tell the audience, I'm no researcher. I've got Google. Come on. I can tell you that Ken here, he's a researcher, and his book it's so easy to follow along with. He doesn't get into all these big words to try and confuse you. He doesn't try and show off that he's brainier than anyone. He just sticks to the facts. And it's really easy to follow along with, and I can't thank you enough for today, Ken. Top notch, brother. Top notch.
Thank you, and likewise.
And I will have Ken back on here sometime real soon. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Remember, don't have a knee-jerk reaction. Let this information sit with you, and go and check out what Ken said. And I'll see you tomorrow when you've learned all about the Nephilim. We have had a great show here. Big thank you to Ken Ammi. Wherever you are, make it TFR and dinny touch that dial.